Steven here from History Hustle, and I'm standing here in Banda, Aceh on the island of Sumatra here in Indonesia. And I'm standing in front of the MacLeod cemetery, a cemetery where more than 2,000 soldiers of the Royal Netherlands East Indies Army are buried. These soldiers fell during the Aceh War, a war from 1873 till 1940, between the Sultanate of Aceh and the Kingdom of the Netherlands. It was basically a series of uprisings and expeditions against each other. To explain how this war emerged, I'll take you back to 1824, when the Treaty of London was signed between the Dutch and the British. The Dutch handed Malacca to the British, and in return they got Sumatra. However, they had to respect the independence of the Sultanate of Aceh, but also it was their duty to make sure the waters around Sumatra were safe for trade. However, there were a lot of pirates, and these pirates came from Aceh. In 1871, the Second Treaty of London was signed. The Dutch had now the right to rule over the whole of Sumatra, also to subject Aceh to their rule. The Sultan of Aceh begged for assistance with the British and later the Ottomans, but he was left alone. The Dutch saw this as a betrayal and launched their attack. The underlying reason was also the very lucrative pepper trade in Aceh, and the Dutch wanted that. The first expedition in 1873 failed miserably. Commanding General Curler died in action, and there were too many Acehnese to handle for the Dutch, who also lacked artillery fire. Therefore, Governor General Loudon ordered his troops to retreat back to Java. After this, a whole paper war emerged, with investigation after investigation to point out whose fault it was that the first expedition failed so miserably. But it can be said that the Dutch heavily underestimated the Acehnese, and what followed the same year was the second expedition, under the leadership of the Dutch General van Swieten. The Creton, the main holdout of the Acehnese rebellions, was conquered very quickly, and therefore the war was declared to be ended. But this was not true. The Dutch hold Banda Aceh and its harbor with some fortifications, but they were unable to control the outskirt areas where Acehnese rebels were active and waged a guerrilla war against the Dutch, murdering Europeans and assaulting their supply lines. In 1891, the Dutch Arabist Christian Snoek Hugronje arrived in Aceh. He was Dutch, but also Muslim, and he made his pilgrimage to Mecca, and with that, he was respected by the Acehnese people. He did research about the Acehnese people, but he was a spy for Governor General van Heut. This governor applied a strategy of contra-guerrilla. With his corps marchés to voet, he deployed small groups of Javanese and Ambonese soldiers led by Europeans to follow the Acehnese guerrillas into the mountains to defeat them there. And this had effect. One by one, Acehnese rulers surrendered to the Dutch. And then, in 1903, the final Sultan, Mohammed Daoud, surrendered to the Dutch. And with that, the Sultanate of Aceh came to an end. General van Heut was rewarded for his accomplishment. The Aceh War is one of the darker episodes in the history of the Netherlands. Van Heut applied a policy of so-called dosed violence, but in reality this meant mass executions in the areas that were not under Dutch control. In 1904, under Officer Van Dalen, thousands of men, women and children became victims of this so-called dosed violence. This led to controversy in the Netherlands, and Van Heut was forced to put Van Dalen out of his charge. In 1914, the final stronghold of the Acehnese rebellions were destroyed, and with that, the end of the Aceh War was there. But it never came fully peaceful in Aceh. There were always murders and attacks. In 1942, when the Japanese arrived, the Acehnese rose against the Dutch once more, and the Dutch fled. After World War II, when the Indonesian War of Independence was waged between the Indonesians and the Dutch never did an effort to establish their rule in Aceh once more.